a millionaire abandoned his wife for being uneducated. 5 years later, she returns as the president of the country, and he begs for a second chance. What she does next leaves everyone in absolute shock. Before you watch, like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on where you're from so we can bring you even more videos. Chapter 1. The Price of Betrayal. The air in the hospital room carried the characteristic scent of antiseptic, mixed with the soft perfume of the few white roses the nurse had placed on the bedside table. Helena was breathing slowly, each movement of her chest sending waves of pain through her newly cut abdomen. The fluorescent light seemed too bright for her tired eyes after 18 hours of labor that culminated in an emergency C-section. But none of that mattered when her gaze met the small, sleeping bundle in the bassinet next to her bed. "Michael," she whispered, feeling her son's name dance on her lips like a prayer. A 3-pound, 9-ounce miracle that had completely transformed her world in the last 6 hours. The heart monitor next to her bed maintained a constant and comforting rhythm. Beep, 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 like a mechanical lullaby that accompanied the sleep of mother and son on that autumn afternoon. Helena fought against the sleep induced by the painkillers, wanting to absorb every second of that new beginning. Her fingers, still marked by the IV, delicately touched the newborn's cheek. Skin against skin. The most real sensation she had ever experienced. Edward must be on his way, she thought, checking the clock on the wall for the 10th time that hour. Her husband had left to take care of some urgent business as soon as the doctors confirmed that both mother and baby were fine. Typical of Edward Miller, the real estate magnate who turned every minute into money, every opportunity into an empire. 15 years of marriage had taught Helena to adapt, to be patient, to understand that business always came first. She, the beautiful trophy wife who had abandoned her promising architectural career to be the perfect hostess, the impeccable companion to the man everyone admired. Perhaps now, with Michael, the priorities would finally change. The soft sound of Italian shoes against the vinyl floor announced someone's arrival even before the door opened. Helena felt her face light up with an automatic smile, the one she had perfected over the years. "My love, come and meet our—" The words died on her lips when she realized that Edward was not alone. For a moment, her exhausted brain could not process the image. Her husband, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit she herself had chosen, held a leather briefcase in his left hand. But it was the woman by his side who captured her attention. Juliana Torres, his personal assistant for 2 years. The same one who had organized her baby shower 3 months ago. "Helena." Edward's voice sounded strangely formal, as if he were about to close a difficult deal. "We need to talk." The heart monitor accelerated its rhythm, as if it also sensed what was to come. Beep, 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 beep. "Now?" Helena asked, her voice weaker than she would have liked. "Edward, I just gave birth to our son." A heavy silence took over the room, broken only by the soft sound of Michael's breathing and the incessant beep of the monitor. Edward moved forward, placing the briefcase on the bed. His eyes, the same brown eyes that had once made her believe in fairy tales, now avoided hers. "I didn't plan to do this like this," he began, and Helena felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "But the lawyers said the sooner we resolve it, the better for everyone." "Resolve what?" The words came out trembling, although deep down she already knew the answer. Edward finally met her eyes, and what Helena saw there was not remorse, but impatience, as if she were just another obstacle in his busy schedule. "I'm filing for divorce, Helena." The world seemed to stop. The beep of the monitor, the smell of the hospital, the fluorescent lights. Everything became distant, as if she were watching the scene from far away. A tingling sensation began in her fingers, running up her arms. "I've found the true love of my life," Edward continued, his hand finding Juliana's, who remained a few steps behind, her face a mask of false compassion. Helena looked at the newborn, her son. So small, so perfect, so oblivious to the fact that his world had just fallen apart before it had even really begun. Then she looked back at the man who had promised to love her forever, 15 years ago, under an altar of flowers and expectations. "You're leaving me? Now?" The words came out as an incredulous whisper. "The papers are all here." Edward pushed the briefcase toward her. "My lawyers were generous in the initial offer, considering the prenuptial agreement significantly limits your rights. But I'm willing to be reasonable, for Michael." The mention of their son's name on Edward's lips awakened something inside Helena, a spark of indignation that quickly turned into a flame. "You planned this, didn't you?" Her voice found strength from somewhere deep inside. "You waited for me to give birth, so you wouldn't have to deal with a pregnant wife in the divorce process, for the press, for your investors." Edward had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "Things between us haven't been good for a long time, Helena. You know that, right?" "No," she replied, clarity emerging through the fog of shock and medication. "What I know is that you waited for the moment when I would be most vulnerable, hooked up to monitors, unable to get up, physically and emotionally exhausted." A nurse appeared at the door, alerted probably by the heart monitor, which now registered Helena's growing agitation. "Is everything okay here?" "No," Helena replied, before Edward could intervene. "It's not. I would like these people to leave my room, please." The nurse, catching the palpable tension in the air, nodded firmly. "Sir, it might be better to come back later. The patient needs rest." Edward adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture Helena knew well. "Helena, be reasonable. We can resolve this civilly." It was then that something broke inside her, not her heart. That was already in pieces, but the invisible chains of submission and appearances that had kept her captive for 15 years. With a calmness that surprised even herself, Helena picked up the document briefcase. "You will regret this moment for the rest of your life, Edward." It was not a threat, but a statement, pronounced with the certainty of someone who has just glimpsed the future. Edward's expression wavered for a moment, as if he finally realized the magnitude of what he was doing. But it was just a flicker, quickly replaced by the mask of corporate efficiency he wore as a second skin. "My lawyers will be in touch," he finally said, guiding Juliana out of the room. When the door closed, Helena allowed the tears to finally fall, not from sadness or despair, but from a primitive anger she had never felt before. She looked at Michael, still sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the storm that had just broken. "It's just you and me now, my love," she whispered, caressing her son's few dark hairs. "But I promise it will be enough. More than enough." Chapter 2. A New Dawn. The next 448 hours passed in a blur of nurses, doctors, unanswered calls, and ignored messages. Helena refused to see anyone other than the medical staff, and Sophia, the housekeeper who had worked in her home for more than a decade. "My heavens, child, what kind of nonsense is this?" Sophia exclaimed when Helena, through contained tears, explained the situation. The older woman, with her gray hair always immaculately pinned in a bun, was the closest thing to a mother Helena had since she lost her parents in an accident years ago. He ended things with me, Sophia," Helena replied, watching Michael in her arms, breastfeeding peacefully, as if 15 years meant nothing. Sophia sat on the edge of the bed, her hands calloused from a lifetime of work, gently stroking Helena's hair. Men like Edward Miller think the world revolves around them because for a long time we allowed it to, she said, with a wisdom that came from experience. But you know what I learned in my 65 years? The universe has a very special way of settling scores. Helena desperately wanted to believe those words, but all she could feel was the overwhelming weight of reality. In less than a week, she would need to leave the hospital and face a world that suddenly seemed vast, hostile, and unknown. "Where do we go, Sophia?" she asked, the vulnerability exposed in every syllable. "I can't go back to that house. Not after this." Sophia squeezed her hand firmly. "My child, do you think after taking care of you for 15 years, I would leave you on the street? My apartment is nothing special, but it has an extra room that will be perfect for Michael's crib." The tears returned in full force, but this time they were of gratitude. "I don't know how I'm going to pay you, Sophia. Edward will probably freeze all the accounts as soon as he realizes I haven't signed the papers immediately. And since when does family pay family?" Sophia replied simply. "Besides, this is temporary. You are Helena Miller. You may have left your career to be a wife, but you never stopped being the brilliant girl who graduated at the top of your architecture class." There, in that moment of absolute fragility, something began to stir inside Helena. A seed of determination planted in the fertile ground of indignation. "I'm going to need a lawyer," she said, more to herself than to Sophia. "Someone who isn't afraid to face the Miller empire." Sophia smiled, a smile that carried the knowledge of someone who had seen many battles. "I know just the person, an old family friend who owes the Millers some favors." Helena's cell phone rang for the 10th time that afternoon. Edward's name flashed on the screen like a painful reminder of reality. "Aren't you going to answer?" Sophia asked. Helena looked at Michael, now asleep after feeding. His face was the perfect image of peace. Then she turned the phone off completely. "No, he wanted war, Sophia, and war is what he'll get." The nurse entered the room with a gentle smile. "How are we feeling, Mommy?" Helena took a deep breath, feeling every pang of physical pain, every fragment of a broken heart, every drop of humiliation. And then, as if making a decision that would change the course of an entire life, she replied, getting stronger by the minute. That night, alone with her son in the hospital room, Helena opened the briefcase that Edward had left behind. Page after page of legal language designed to minimize her participation in 15 years of partnership. Clauses about the mansion, about the businesses, about bank accounts. Everything carefully drafted to leave her with as little as possible. On the last page, where she was supposed to sign, Helena picked up a pen, but instead of her signature, she wrote a single sentence. "You have no idea who I really am." Closing the briefcase, she looked out the hospital window at the city lights that stretched to the horizon. The same city where Edward was considered a king. The same city that would soon discover that even kings can fall. "Your father thinks he's destroyed me today, Michael?" she whispered to the sleeping baby. "But he just created something far more dangerous than a hurt woman. He created a mother with a mission." The stars twinkled in the night sky as silent witnesses to a promise being made. The promise that the woman who would leave that hospital would not be the same one who had entered. As Michael slept, oblivious to the world of adults and its complexities, Helena began to mentally trace the first steps of a journey that would transform not only her life, but that of everyone around her. A story not of a victim, but of rebirth. Not of a fall, but of an ascent. The story of a woman who, in the moment of her greatest vulnerability, found her greatest strength. What do you think of Helena's decision to not sign the divorce papers immediately? Was she being smart, or just holding on to false hope? Chapter 3. The Secret Weapon. The sound of rain against the window of Sophia's small apartment created a curtain of sound that lulled Michael's restless sleep. Helena watched her son, asleep in the makeshift crib, a wicker basket lined with soft sheets that the housekeeper had kept for decades, waiting for the day she would have grandchildren. Life had other plans for Sophia, just as it had for Helena. 7 days had passed since they left the hospital. 7 days of a reality that still felt like a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. The C-section scar still pulsed with occasional pain, a physical reminder of the moment her life had been split in two, before and after the betrayal. "Here, child, chamomile tea with a touch of honey." Sophia entered the small but cozy room, holding out a steaming cup. "It will help you rest." Helena accepted the warm drink, feeling the familiar aroma momentarily calm her frayed nerves. "Thank you for everything, Sophia." The older woman sat on the edge of the bed, her hands marked by a lifetime of work finding Helena's. "Dr. Matthias called while you were in the shower. He said he can see us tomorrow at 10 a.m. Ricardo Matthias. The name evoked distant memories of her childhood, the lawyer who had handled her parents' estate, a man whose reputation for integrity was as well known as his fame as a ruthless opponent in court. "Do you think he'll take the case?" Helena asked, vulnerability escaping through the cracks of her newfound determination. Sophia smiled, that smile that carried the wisdom of 6 decades of life. "Ricardo Matthias watched you take your first steps, Helena. He held your hand at your parents' funeral, and he has a personal score to settle with the Miller family that predates even Edward's birth." Helena looked up, her curiosity momentarily overcoming her exhaustion. "What kind of score?" "That's a story for another day," Sophia replied, standing up with a slight groan of her tired joints. "Now you need to rest. Tomorrow, the real war begins. War." The word resonated in Helena's mind as she settled beside her son's crib. She had never been a belligerent person. The promising architect who had fallen in love with Edward 15 years ago believed in building, not in destroying. Creating spaces of harmony, not battlefields. "Who am I now?" she whispered to the shadows of the room, her phone in her hands, showing the banking app screen. 0. All the joint accounts emptied. The credit card canceled. Even the small savings she had in her name, the result of her work before the marriage, mysteriously blocked. A small sob escaped her lips before she could contain it. Not for the money itself, but for the meaning of that act. Edward was not just leaving her. He was erasing her, eliminating 15 years as if they were an inconvenient accounting error in his personal ledger. Michael stirred in his crib, perhaps sensing his mother's anguish. Helena quickly wiped away her tears. "No, my love. Mommy is not going to cry anymore," she promised, gently stroking the baby's belly. "We're going to show your father exactly what we're made of." Ricardo Matthias's office had not changed much since the last time Helena had been there, more than a decade ago. The same law books lined dark mahogany shelves, the same smell of strong coffee and old paper, the same aura of solemnity that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "Helena Vasconcelos!" The gray-haired man with incredibly blue eyes stood up when she entered, Michael nestled in her arms. "Or should I say, Helena Mendonça?" "Vance?" she replied, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "I am in the process of taking back much more than just my maiden name." Ricardo smiled, his expression lines deepening. "That's the Helena I knew. Please, have a seat. Sophia has already filled me in on the general situation, but I need to hear every detail directly from you." Over the next hour, Helena meticulously recounted the events, from the devastating moment in the hospital to the discovery of the empty accounts and canceled cards. Ricardo listened intently, taking occasional notes, his face a professional mask that only occasionally revealed flashes of indignation. "So, let me summarize," he said finally, closing his Mont Blanc pen with a decisive click. "Edward Miller entered your hospital room 6 hours after you gave birth, accompanied by his mistress, to deliver divorce papers. Subsequently, he emptied all joint accounts, canceled your access to financial resources, and, from what Sophia informed me, is spreading among mutual friends that you had some kind of postpartum collapse that made the continuation of the marriage impossible." Helena felt her blood run cold. "He's saying what?" "He's building a narrative, Helena," Sophia explained gently, who was holding Michael while Helena talked to the lawyer. "It started with insinuations about your emotional stability, concerned comments about how you were fragile during the pregnancy. The same story was told to 3 of my friends who work in other houses in the neighborhood." The realization hit Helena like a slap. "He's preparing the ground for a custody battle," she whispered, horror growing in her chest. "He wants to take Michael from me." "He will not," Ricardo stated with such conviction that Helena almost believed him. "But we need to be strategic. Edward has money, connections, and apparently no scruples. We have the truth, justice, and something he will never have." "What?" Helena asked, holding the hand the lawyer offered her. "Underestimation," he replied with an enigmatic smile. "Edward thinks he is dealing with the trophy wife he molded over 15 years. He has no idea he is facing the daughter of Carlos and Beatrice Vance." For the first time in days, a glimmer of hope lit up inside Helena. Her parents, though they had left too soon, had left a legacy of integrity and strength that lived in her blood. "But we don't have much time," Ricardo continued, his tone returning to pragmatism. "The first preliminary hearing has been scheduled for 6 weeks from now. I need you to document absolutely everything. Every message, every call, every moment with Michael. And more importantly," he slid a card across the table, "this is Dr. Paulo Ribeiro, the best family therapist in the city. You will start weekly sessions with him, not only for your mental health, which is fundamental, but also to establish a professional record of your emotional stability and commitment to Michael's well-being." Helena took the card, feeling the weight of that simple recommendation. "Do you really think he'll try to use my mental health against me?" "I am absolutely sure," Ricardo replied. "And every step we take from now on must be not only defensive, but also preventive." The following weeks passed in a blur of consultations with Ricardo, sessions with Dr. Paulo, sleepless nights with Michael, and days spent trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy. Helena had started to seek out her old contacts from the architecture school, trying to rekindle professional connections that could eventually lead her back into the job market. The notification arrived on a rainy Thursday. The date for the first preliminary separation hearing had been moved up to the following Monday, an obvious tactic to destabilize her, to give her less time to prepare. "He's nervous," Ricardo commented on the phone when Helena called in a panic. "That's good for us. Nervous people make mistakes." On the morning of the hearing, Helena wore the only formal outfit she had managed to bring from the mansion before the locks were changed, a discreet and elegant navy blue dress she had worn on her last wedding anniversary. The irony was not lost on her as she adjusted the fabric over her body, still recovering from the pregnancy. "You look beautiful, child," Sophia affirmed, helping her with the zipper. "A queen preparing for battle." Helena smiled, grateful for the constant presence of the housekeeper who had become her family. "A queen without a kingdom, Sophia." "For now," the older woman replied, her eyes shining with an unshakable certainty. "For now." The family court was an imposing building in the city center, its marble columns projecting an aura of permanence and authority. Helena felt a tremor run through her body as she climbed the steps. Michael nestled against her chest in a carefully adjusted sling. "Remember," Ricardo murmured at her side, "stay calm, no matter what happens in there. They'll be watching your every expression, your every reaction." "They?" "Edward won't come alone. I have information that, in addition to his legal team, he will bring—" The lawyer's words were interrupted by the sight that awaited them in the main lobby. Edward, impeccable in a gray Italian suit, was accompanied not only by 3 severe-looking lawyers, but also by Juliana, his assistant, now mistress, and, to Helena's shock, by Dr. Monica Silvera, the obstetrician who had performed her prenatal care throughout the pregnancy. "What the hell is she doing here?" Helena whispered, feeling her legs go weak. Ricardo held her elbow firmly, keeping her upright. "Exactly what we suspected. They are building the case on your supposed instability. They probably convinced the doctor to testify about some episode of anxiety or emotion during your pregnancy, twisting it as evidence of your inability." The betrayal of that woman, who had held her hand during contractions, who had brought Michael into the world, hit Helena with an unexpected force. It was as if every pillar of her old life was being systematically destroyed. Michael stirred against her chest, and that small movement reignited her determination. "Let's get this over with," she said, lifting her chin and walking directly toward her ex-husband. Edward seemed momentarily disconcerted to see her approach with such confidence. His eyes lowered to Michael, and for a fleeting instant, something akin to genuine emotion crossed his face. "Helena," he greeted formally. "You're, well." "Better than ever, Edward," she replied, her voice controlled and clear. "Michael is also doing great, in case you were actually interested in knowing." Before he could reply, the doors to the courtroom opened and everyone was called to enter. The preliminary hearing went exactly as Ricardo had predicted. Edward's team presented a carefully constructed image of Helena as an emotionally unstable woman, potentially incapable of properly caring for her son without supervision. Dr. Monica, avoiding Helena's gaze, spoke of episodes of severe anxiety during the 3rd trimester, conveniently omitting that such episodes coincided with the period when Edward began to be absent for days at a time on business trips. Then came the blow Helena didn't expect. "Your Honor, we would like to present documentary evidence," Edward's lead lawyer announced, handing a folder to the judge. "These are copies of electronic conversations between Mrs. Miller and her former therapist, Dr. Luisa Campos, dated approximately 2 years ago, where she expresses significant doubts about her desire to become a mother." Helena felt the blood drain from her face. Those sessions had occurred during a difficult period in her marriage, when Edward was constantly pressuring her for the child he considered necessary to complete their perfect family. She had sought therapy precisely to process the pressure she felt, not because she rejected motherhood. "How did they get that?" she whispered to Ricardo, horrified. "Those conversations are confidential." Ricardo squeezed her hand under the table. "This is illegal. They are desperate." The judge, a middle-aged man with an impassive expression, examined the documents for a long moment before looking up. "Mr. Pereira," he addressed Edward's lawyer, "the court is curious as to how these documents protected by professional secrecy came into your possession." A tense silence hung over the room. Helena watched a flicker of concern cross Edward's face for the first time. "Your Honor," Ricardo stood up, his voice calm and controlled. "We would like to register our vehement objection, not only to the admissibility of this evidence obtained in a clearly illegal manner, but also to the systematic tactic of defamation employed by the opposing party. In fact, this raises serious questions about other possible unethical behaviors that may be occurring." The judge nodded gravely. "I agree, Dr. Matias. These documents will be disregarded, and I strongly warn Mr. Miller's team about the ethical and legal implications of presenting evidence obtained by questionable means. It was at that moment, watching Edward's face harden with poorly concealed anger, that Helena fully understood. Her ex-husband had planned this for months, perhaps years. The betrayal in the hospital had not been an impulse, but the culmination of a carefully orchestrated strategy. Your Honor, Ricardo continued, we would like to request full access to Mr. Miller's financial records from the last 5 years. We have reason to believe that there has been significant dissipation of marital assets in anticipation of this divorce. Edward shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and Helena realized that there was more to this story than she knew. Much more. When the hearing ended, 2 hours later, Helena felt exhausted, but strangely invigorated. The judge had denied Edward's initial request for supervised visits with Michael, establishing instead a temporary schedule that recognized the importance of the maternal bond in the first months. This was just the first round, Ricardo commented as they left the courthouse. But we scored important points. What happens now? Helena asked, adjusting Michael in her arms. Now? The lawyer replied with a determined glint in his eyes. We start digging. There's something in Edward's financial records that's making him nervous, and we're going to find out exactly what it is. As they walked to the parking lot, Helena felt the weight of a gaze on her. Turning, she found Edward watching her from the courthouse entrance, his face an unreadable mask of conflicting emotions. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the distance. There was no more love there, not even nostalgia. Only the crystalline clarity of two people who, after 15 years together, were finally seeing each other for the first time. Helena was the first to look away, not out of weakness, but out of choice. The past was behind her. Ahead, though still wrapped in a fog of uncertainty, a future awaited. One that she would build with her own hands, brick by brick, day by day. Let's go home, Michael, she whispered to her son, who responded with a sleepy yawn. We have a lot of work ahead of us. What do you think Ricardo found in Edward's financial records? And what will that mean for the fate of Edward's empire? Chapter 4, The Flash Drive. Autumn gave way to winter when Helena found the flash drive. It had been a particularly exhausting day. Michael, now 4 months old, was going through a phase of colic that turned early mornings into endless sessions of crying and comforting. On top of that, Edward had intensified his legal tactics, bombarding Ricardo with requests for documentation and additional hearings, an obvious strategy to drain Helena's limited financial resources. The small apartment, though cozy, was starting to feel claustrophobic. Cardboard boxes with the few belongings Helena had managed to retrieve from the mansion before Edward's security guards completely blocked her access were piled up in a corner of the bedroom, most of them still unopened. You need to organize that, child, Sophia commented as she came in with a cup of tea, finding Helena sitting on the floor among the boxes, Michael finally asleep in his makeshift crib. It's not good to live among boxes. It makes it seem like you're just passing through. Helena sighed, running a hand through her hair that hadn't received salon care in weeks. And I'm not. We can't stay here forever, Sophia. The housekeeper sat on the edge of the bed, watching the young mother with eyes that mixed concern and admiration. No, you can't. But until you find your next home, you need to make this a place of peace, not a storage room for dusty memories. There was wisdom in those simple words. Helena nodded, pulling one of the smaller boxes toward her, the one that contained some personal items from her vanity table. She opened it methodically, separating what was essential, what could be kept, and what should be discarded. At the bottom of the box, under a silk scarf Edward had given her for their first wedding anniversary, she found a small velvet bag she hadn't seen in months, the party bag she had used at the last charity event they had attended together before she found out she was pregnant. "I remember that day," Sophia commented, recognizing the item. "You looked stunning in that turquoise blue dress." Helena smiled sadly, opening the small bag. A lipstick, a compact mirror, an extra credit card that Edward had probably already canceled, and a small black flash drive, with no identification. "What is this?" she murmured more to herself than to Sophia, turning the object between her fingers. Fragmented memories of that night emerged slowly. The party at the Children of the Future Foundation. Edward was exceptionally distracted, constantly on the phone. The quick conversation with Henry Dalton, the CFO of the Miller Group, who was visibly nervous, as he slipped something into her bag while Edward was busy with investors. "Keep this," he had whispered. "Don't mention it to anyone, not even to Edward." At the time, Helena had been confused, even a little frightened by Henry's intensity. Between the excitement of the party and the discovery of her pregnancy the following week, the strange episode and the flash drive had been completely forgotten. "Sophia, I need to use a computer," Helena said, getting up with a sudden urgency. The housekeeper raised an eyebrow. "My nephew's old laptop is in the kitchen drawer. It's nothing fancy, but it works." With slightly trembling hands, Helena connected the flash drive to the computer. Nothing happened initially. Then, a window opened, asking for a password. "Damn," she murmured. She tried the obvious passwords: Edward's birthday, their wedding date, even the company name. Nothing worked. She was about to give up when her eyes fell on a photo on Sophia's kitchen wall. Herself, younger, hugging her parents in front of the old Vance mansion, before it was sold after their death. On an inexplicable impulse, she typed the address of that house. Alameda das Palmeiras, 237. The screen flickered, and suddenly dozens of files appeared. Helena felt her heart race as she opened the first document. A spreadsheet with dates, values, and codes that initially seemed incomprehensible. But as she examined more files, a pattern began to emerge. Transfers to numbered accounts in tax havens, records of shell companies, contracts with clauses underlined in red. "Sophia," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I need to call Ricardo, now." Chapter 6. The Ultimate Revenge. "This is pure dynamite," Ricardo commented 3 hours later, sitting at Sophia's kitchen table. The contents of the flash drive spread out in printouts in front of him. Henry Dalton basically documented years of tax evasion, money laundering, and bribery of public officials by the Miller Group. Helena watched the lawyer with a mixture of shock and vindication. "Why would Henry give me this?" Ricardo took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose thoughtfully. "Life insurance. Smart people always keep a nuclear option for when they're chosen as scapegoats. According to the date of these documents, this was just before the coastal construction scandal, when that building partially collapsed." "I remember that." Helena nodded. "Edward was a nervous wreck back then. He said it was the press pressure, but he was probably afraid that the investigations would reach the irregularities that Henry documented here." Ricardo completed. "What I don't understand is why he chose you as the custodian of this material." Helena reflected for a moment, recalling her years of living with the discreet finance executive of her ex-husband's empire. "Henry always treated me with respect, unlike the other executives who saw me as just a trophy wife. Maybe he knew what Edward was planning. Maybe he wanted to give me a form of protection." Ricardo carefully gathered the papers. "Whatever the reason, this completely changes the game. Edward Miller is not just a cheating husband. He's a criminal who could face years in prison if this becomes public." A chill ran down Helena's spine. "What do we do now?" The lawyer looked at her with seriousness. That's up to you, Helena. We can use this information as leverage in the divorce negotiations. Guarantee an extremely favorable settlement in exchange for your silence. Or we can turn everything over to the authorities, she completed, feeling the weight of that choice. Ricardo nodded gravely. But understand the implications. If Edward is criminally prosecuted, it will affect the companies. Innocent employees could lose their jobs. The Miller name, which is also Michael's last name, will be publicly tarnished. Helena stood up, walking to the crib where her son was sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the storms brewing around him. She watched his serene little face, his small fingers curled into tiny fists, the total trust and innocence in every calm breath. I need to think, she finally answered. This isn't just about revenge against Edward. It's about Michael's future, too. The next morning, while feeding Michael, Helena was surprised by a call from an unknown number. Helena Miller, a formal male voice on the other end said when she answered. This is Henry Dalton. We need to talk, in person. Helena's heart raced. How did you get this number? A brief silence. I have my methods. About the flash drive. I don't know what you're talking about, she interrupted quickly, a self-preservation instinct taking over. Henry sighed. Helena, I'm not calling as an enemy. Edward is getting desperate. He knows you have something. He doesn't know what exactly, but he feels there's something. He's planning to escalate his tactics. The kind of tactics that make you question your own sanity. Henry replied grimly. I need to see you. Cafe Antonella, at 2 p.m. Come alone. The call was ended before Helena could reply. Cafe Antonella was on a side street in the historic downtown, away from the circuits frequented by the city's business elite. A discreet place with dark wood tables and soft lighting, where no one paid much attention to the other customers. Helena arrived 5 minutes before the scheduled time, Michael asleep in his stroller beside her. She chose a table in the back from where she could observe the entrance. Henry appeared punctually at 2, his usual impeccable suit replaced by jeans and a simple shirt. He seemed to have aged years since the last time Helena had seen him. Thank you for coming, he said, sitting across from her, looking briefly at Michael with a softened expression. He has grown. Children tend to do that, Helena replied dryly. What's so urgent, Henry? The executive laced his fingers together on the table, his shoulders visibly tense. Edward is selling off assets, transferring properties, moving money at a frantic pace. I think he plans to leave the country. The revelation hit Helena like a physical blow. What? When? I'm not sure. Perhaps weeks, a few months at most. It depends on how much he can liquidate quickly without raising suspicion. And Juliana? A bitter smile appeared on Henry's lips. Ah, she knows nothing. She's just another disposable piece on the board, just as I am becoming. Helena studied the man in front of her, noticing the signs of stress he could barely hide. Why are you telling me this? Henry looked her directly in the eyes for the first time. Because you deserve to know. Because I participated in the building of this empire of lies for too long. And because he intends to take Michael. The world seemed to freeze around Helena. What do you mean, take Michael? Part of the plan. Get custody, then disappear with the child to a country with no extradition treaty. A new life for him and his heir. Helena felt a wave of nausea and anger so intense that for a moment she feared she would pass out. Instinctively, her hand moved to the stroller, touching Michael as if to make sure he was still there. Safe. Why should I believe you? She asked, when she finally recovered her voice. Henry slid an envelope across the table. Because I have nothing to gain by lying to you now, and because I am about to disappear too, but for different reasons. Here is more documentation, emails, recorded conversations, the complete plan. Use it however you see fit. He stood up, leaving some bills on the table for the coffee he hadn't even ordered. One last thing, Helena. Edward isn't the only one involved in this. There are powerful people behind him, people who benefited from the schemes documented on that flash drive. Be careful, very careful. With those words, Henry walked to the exit, stopping briefly to look one last time at Helena and the baby. "You're stronger than he ever imagined," he said before disappearing through the door. "He's bluffing," Sophia insisted when Helena recounted the meeting hours later. "Edward would never abandon the entire empire he built here." "Unless the empire is about to crumble," Ricardo pondered, examining the new documents provided by Henry. "These emails suggest that there is a federal investigation underway, focused on some of the Miller Group's largest projects." Helena sat down heavily on Sophia's worn sofa, the reality of the situation finally hitting her with full force. She wasn't just fighting for a fair share of marital assets or for Michael's custody. She was in the middle of something much bigger and potentially more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "What do I do now?" she asked, the vulnerability evident in her voice. Ricardo closed the document folder, his face grave. "First, we need to ensure your safety and Michael's. If half of what is in here is true, powerful people will be desperate to silence any threat. I can't just hide," Helena protested. "I have the custody hearing in 2 weeks." "And we'll be there," Ricardo assured her, "but with additional precautions. In the meantime, we need a safer place for you and Michael to stay. Sophia's apartment is the first place they'll look." Helena felt the weight of the situation on her shoulders. Every decision now seemed to have monumental consequences, not only for her, but for her son. For innocent people involved in the Miller companies, even for the city that depended on the jobs generated by the conglomerate. "How did we get to this point?" she asked, more to herself than to others. "How did I not notice what was happening right under my nose all these years?" Sophia sat next to her, wrapping her in a maternal hug. "Don't blame yourself, child. Edward built that world precisely to keep you encapsulated, protected from the reality of his business, the perfect trophy wife in his golden mansion." The words, though harsh, carried a liberating truth. For 15 years, Helena had lived in a meticulously designed bubble, her role carefully defined and limited. The brilliant architect slowly transformed into an hostess of charity events and a decorative companion. But now the bubble had burst, and in the midst of the sharp shards of reality that emerged, Helena was beginning to glimpse not only danger, but also possibility. The possibility of finally rediscovering who she was, what she was capable of. "I need some air," she said suddenly, standing up. "I'm going for a walk with Michael." Ricardo seemed about to protest, but something in Helena's determined look stopped him. "Don't go far, and keep your phone close." She nodded, placing Michael in the stroller, careful not to wake him. The afternoon was cool, the sky painted with the golden hues of late autumn. As she walked through the familiar streets of the neighborhood where she had grown up, Helena felt her mind finally clearing after months of emotional turmoil. Edward had taken almost everything from her: her home, her financial security, her social identity. He had tried to destroy her in the moment of her greatest vulnerability. But there was something he hadn't been able to touch, something that now, paradoxically, emerged stronger precisely because of his actions. Her determination. "He's not going to win, Michael," she whispered to her sleeping son. "And more importantly, he's not going to take you away from me. I promise you that." At that exact moment, passing a dusty, closed antique shop, Helena stopped. A discreet sign read, "For sale by Central Real Estate." Something about the old brick building and stained glass windows caught her attention. Perhaps the way the afternoon light reflected off the dusty panes, or the quiet dignity of a structure that, though neglected, still held its character. Helena took out her phone, taking a picture of the contact number on the sign. She didn't know exactly why, but she felt she had just found an important piece of the complex puzzle her life had become. A piece that, in some still undefined way, would be fundamental to her transformation from victim to protagonist of her own story. Chapter 7. The Final Turn. The letter arrived on a rainy Wednesday, exactly 6 months after Michael's birth. Helena was trying to calm the baby, who seemed particularly fussy that morning, when Sophia entered the small room with a brown envelope in her hands. "Official correspondence," the housekeeper announced, extending the envelope with a curious expression. "From the notary's office." Helena frowned, adjusting Michael in her arms. "The notary? I don't know anyone with that name." "He's the oldest notary in the city," Sophia explained. "He handles estates and wills of traditional families for decades." With Sophia's help, who held Michael, Helena opened the envelope. As she read the formal document, her eyes widened in surprise. "What is it, child? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Almost," Helena replied, still processing the information. "Apparently, my Aunt Amelia passed away 2 weeks ago. She left me a property in the historic center, an antique shop called Memories of Yesteryear." Sophia let out a gasp of surprise. "I never knew you had property-owning relatives in the city." "Neither did I," Helena confessed, mentally replaying the few times she had heard mentions of her great-aunt Amelia, always in whispered conversations that would stop when I approached. "Apparently, I have a meeting with the notary tomorrow to discuss the details of the inheritance." The antique shop was exactly the kind of place that would go unnoticed by most people. Squeezed between a modern coffee shop and a designer clothing store on Acacia Street, the narrow brick facade and dusty window display contrasted with the ostentatious luxury around it. It was, Helena realized with irony, the same abandoned store that had caught her attention days before. "It looks like it's been closed for months," Ricardo commented, who had insisted on accompanying her on that first visit after the meeting with the notary. Michael slept peacefully in his stroller, oblivious to the importance of the moment. Helena turned the heavy brass key in the antique lock, feeling as if she was opening not just a door, but an entirely new chapter of her life. The creak of the hinges echoed in the silent space as the door swung open, revealing the interior of the store. The smell was the first thing that hit her, a mixture of old wood, old books, and the unmistakable aroma of the past. Dust particles danced in the sunbeams that penetrated through the cracks in the faded curtains, partially illuminating the space filled with furniture covered by white sheets, like silent ghosts waiting to tell their stories. "Well," Ricardo broke the silence, "it looks like you have a project on your hands." Helena slowly moved forward, her fingers lightly brushing an Art Deco lamp, a set of Chinese porcelain, a delicately carved Victorian chair. Each object seemed to whisper fragments of past lives. "The notary said the store is practically bankrupt," she commented, more to herself than to Ricardo. Aunt Amelia had been keeping it out of stubbornness in recent years. More like a personal museum than a business. "And what do you intend to do?" the lawyer asked, carefully watching her reaction. Helena stopped in front of an old mirror, facing her own reflection framed by dark, worked wood. The woman who stared back at her seemed simultaneously familiar and strange. The same features, but a different expression, more determined, more alive. "I'm going to reopen it," she replied, with a certainty that surprised her. "I don't know exactly how yet, but I know this place has a purpose in my life." Ricardo smiled, that enigmatic smile he rarely showed. "You know what's interesting? This store is located exactly between Centaur Tower, the main headquarters of the Miller Companies, and the Palace of Arts, where all the city's major social events take place. Helena absorbed this information, feeling its symbolic meaning. Positioned between her ex-husband's corporate power and the social circle that had excluded her so quickly after the scandal. A small, strategically located fortress. "Let's explore the rest," she suggested, moving toward the back of the store. Beyond the main exhibition space, there was a small area that seemed to have functioned as an office, with an old desk covered in papers and accounting books, and, surprisingly, a door that led to a basement. "I didn't know buildings in this part of the city had basements," Ricardo commented as Helena turned on the light, revealing a wooden staircase that descended into the darkness. "Aunt Amelia certainly kept her secrets," Helena replied, beginning to carefully go down the steps. The basement was considerably larger than the store above. Dark wood shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes, documents, and objects carefully organized. In the center, a large solid wood table supported what appeared to be an old map of the city. "Helena," Ricardo called, his voice suddenly serious. "Come see this." He was in front of a bookshelf in the farthest corner, holding what looked like a photo album. When Helena approached, she saw the image that had captured the lawyer's attention, a sepia photograph showing a group of men in formal attire from the early century in front of a construction site. "Do you recognize anyone?" Ricardo asked. Helena carefully examined the image until her eyes rested on a familiar face, even decades younger. "This is Alfredo Miller," she whispered. "Edward's grandfather." Ricardo nodded gravely. "And do you know who this is next to him?" He pointed to a tall man with an elegant posture. "I have no idea." "Carlos Vance, your grandfather." Helena felt the air escape her lungs. "How do you know?" "Because I recognize him from the photographs in my father's office. Our fathers were partners for a while, remember?" She took the album, slowly turning the pages. More photographs of the two men, old documents, newspaper clippings, and then a deed of partnership for the development of what is today the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, Vance Miller Urban Development Society. Helena read it aloud, the revelation hitting her like a wave. "My grandfather and Edward's grandfather were partners." Ricardo picked up another document from a nearby box, examining it with growing interest. "Not just partners. From what it looks like here, the Vances were the original owners of a large part of the land. The Millers came in with the capital for development. In the following hours, they plunged into an ocean of documents, discovering a story buried for decades. The story of how the Miller family had gradually, over 2 generations, pushed the Vances out of the business, using legal manipulations, obscure clauses, and, eventually, taking advantage of the premature death of Helena's father to consolidate total control. "This explains a lot," Helena murmured when they finally emerged from the basement, carrying boxes of documents that Ricardo considered most relevant. "Edward's obsession with me since college, his father's discomfort when he found out we were dating. They knew who I was, and they probably feared you would discover the truth about the empire they built," Ricardo completed, "which ironically was built in part on properties that once belonged to your family." Michael woke up at that moment, his small whimpers quickly evolving into a cry that echoed in the empty space of the store. Helena picked him up, gently rocking him as she watched the space around her with new eyes. "I think we've found our new home, Michael," she whispered to her son, feeling a renewed determination growing inside her. "And much more than that, we've found our way back." What an incredible twist. What do you think Helena will do with this new information? What kind of revenge will she seek? Chapter 8. The Return. The soft autumn breeze carried the scent of the sea, mixed with the perfume of fresh roses that decorated the garden. The afternoon sun bathed in golden light, the small celebration that was taking place in the back of the antique shop now transformed into an elegant cultural center that celebrated local history. Living memories. The new name Helena had chosen for the space had become, in just 2 years, a respected meeting point for the community. Michael, celebrating his second birthday, ran among the guests with the inexhaustible energy typical of his age, his dark curls bouncing with every movement, his crystalline laughter echoing as the purest expression of joy. Helena watched him with a serene smile, amazed at how 2 years could seem simultaneously an eternity and a blink of an eye. "He has your spirit," Sophia commented, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. The housekeeper, now officially a partner in Helena's venture, had become much more than an employee. She was family, a confidant, the rock that kept her steady during the storm. "And his father's determination?" Helena replied, accepting the glass. "Although I prefer to call it persistence." The 2 women watched the small crowd gathered for the occasion. An unlikely collection of people who, 2 years earlier, would never have imagined sharing the same space in harmony. Old college friends of Helena's, who had helped her redesign the store's space. Local artisans, whose works were now displayed and sold at the cultural center. And traditional families from the city who, attracted by initial curiosity, became loyal customers. And in the farthest corner of the garden, talking privately with Ricardo, was the man who had transformed not only Helena's business, but also, gradually, her cautious heart. Andre, a specialist in recovering hidden assets, had entered her life 14 months earlier, introduced by Ricardo as someone who could help with her financial situation. What began as a strictly professional partnership, he tracking Edward's offshore accounts, she providing crucial information about her ex-husband's financial habits, slowly evolved into something deeper, more meaningful. "He can't stop looking at you," Sophia commented, with a knowing smile, referring to Andre. Helena felt a familiar warmth rise to her cheeks. "We're taking it slow. Michael always comes first." "And that's precisely why he admires you so much," the housekeeper replied. "Men like Andre don't come around twice in a woman's life. Men who respect your battles, who understand your priorities." Helena was about to respond when she noticed a sudden silence spreading through the party. Following the guests' surprised looks, she saw the figure who had just entered through the side gate. Edward Miller looked like a faded version of the imposing man he had been. He still wore expensive clothes, still held the upright posture that his Harvard diploma had given him. But something fundamental had changed. His eyes, once calculating and cold, now carried a shadow of defeat. Helena felt her heart race, not with fear, but with a strange mixture of compassion and vindication. The path to that moment had been long and painful. The federal investigation into the Miller Group's activities, triggered by the documents that Henry Dalton had providentially left in her hands, had not resulted in arrests. Edward had skillfully negotiated his cooperation in exchange for immunity, but in the almost complete dissolution of the business empire. The real estate magnate, who had once dominated the city's market, now managed a minimal fraction of his old business, under strict supervision from the authorities. His fiancée, Juliana, had disappeared at the first sign of trouble, taking with her a considerable amount of money and jewelry. The final blow to his reputation came when Dr. Monica Silvera herself, the obstetrician who had tried to testify against Helena, publicly retracted her statement, admitting she had been pressured by Edward. "I didn't think he would have the courage to show up," Sophia murmured, instinctively positioning herself next to Helena as a guardian. "I invited him," Helena replied simply, surprising the housekeeper. "He is still Michael's father." With measured steps, Helena walked across the garden toward her ex-husband. The guests watched the scene like spectators of a play whose climax was about to happen. Andre and Ricardo, noticing the movement, discreetly approached, ready to intervene if necessary. "Edward," Helena greeted him with serene formality when she reached him. "Thank you for coming." He nodded stiffly, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Where is he?" The question, so simple and so loaded with meaning, made Helena's heart ache. In 2 years, Edward had seen his son only 6 times, always in supervised visits determined by the court. "Michael is playing with the other children," she replied, indicating a small group gathered around an arts and crafts table. "You can go there. He knows who you are." Edward hesitated, an unexpected vulnerability crossing his face. "Does he talk about me? Does he remember me?" "He knows that when he was a baby he didn't have a father, but now he does. That's our story," she replied. "He has your photograph next to his bed." "He has my photograph next to his bed?" he repeated. "I'm the one who doesn't have a photograph of him." "We will make up for lost time," she said softly. "But first, go to him. He's celebrating his 2nd birthday today. It's a very important day." As Edward walked hesitantly toward his son, Helena felt a presence beside her. It was Sophia, who had been watching the scene with an enigmatic expression. "You could have destroyed him completely," the older woman commented bluntly. "You had all the weapons you needed." Helena studied the aristocratic profile of Sophia, the same striking features that Edward had inherited, the same posture that commanded respect. "Destruction was never my goal," Helena replied sincerely. "Justice? Yes. Protection for my son? Absolutely. But revenge for the sake of revenge? That would only consume us all." Sophia nodded slowly, a reluctant respect dawning in her eyes. "The Vances were always wise. That's what attracted my father-in-law to your grandfather initially, before greed entered the equation." The 2 women watched in silence as Edward knelt awkwardly in front of Michael. The boy looked at his father with curiosity, offering him a piece of cake in his small hand. What an incredible twist. "What do you think of Helena's decision to forgive her ex-husband and let him back into their lives? Was she right to do it?" Chapter 9. The Final Act. The summer continued, and with it came a deepening of the bonds between everyone. The antique shop turned cultural center was thriving. The money that Henry Dalton had stolen from Edward's family and returned to Helena had been used to acquire the building, a space that became a symbol of her transformation. Her project, now called Gems of a New Life, was providing opportunities for dozens of women in the community. As for Edward, his visits to Michael became a priority in his life. He found his greatest joy in the simplest moments, reading bedtime stories to his son, teaching him how to draw, and seeing his face light up with happiness. He was a good father, and Michael loved him unconditionally. A year after the gala, Helena and Andre stood in the garden, watching the sunset. He had been her rock, her confidant, her partner in business and in life. She had learned to trust him, to lean on him, and to love him for the man he was, honest, kind, and supportive. "I don't think I could have done it without you, Andre," she confessed. "You helped me rediscover who I am." "You were always that person, Helena," he replied. "You just needed someone to remind you." He then got down on one knee, holding a small velvet box. "I don't have a family crest or a multi-million-dollar business, but I have you, I have Michael, and I have a life I want to build with you." He opened the box to reveal a beautiful ring with a small, unpolished stone in the center. "It's a rough amethyst, from the same community your project started in. It's not perfect, but it's real, just like our love." Helena's eyes welled up with tears. "Yes, she said. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. And they were married in the garden of the antique shop a few months later, surrounded by friends and family. It was a simple wedding, but it was filled with love and laughter. It wasn't about status or money, but about two people who had found their way back to each other, against all odds. It was the perfect ending to a story that began with a lie, and that's where our story ends. But the legacy of Helena's life continues. Her journey from a humiliated wife to a respected entrepreneur and leader shows us that our true value is not defined by money or status, but by our resilience, our courage, and our capacity to love. As for Edward, his downfall was a harsh lesson, but one that he needed to learn. He may have lost his empire, but he gained a second chance to be a father to his son. And in the end, he learned that the most precious things in life are the ones that can't be bought. He learned that the only legacy that truly matters is the one you build with love. What an incredible journey of resilience and transformation. What does Helena's story teach you about finding success and happiness after adversity? Share your deepest thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more inspiring and true-to-life narratives.